Let's start. Welcome to everybody to the next CVA Enterprise Working Group webinar. I would like to welcome you. My name is Mauro Cappiello. I'm also here with Dennis. He's the co-chair. We're both co-chair of the Enterprise Working Group.
Yes, hello everybody. Nice to have you here today.
Today, quickly, we wanted to wrap up and tell you a little bit what we want to do, what our focus is with the Enterprise Working Group. So basically, we would like to push and identify success factors for enterprises that allows them to kind of implement blockchain projects. And Dennis is focusing on that together with the group, writing up, or they're writing a book about this more or less now, which will come out this year or in the next months. I'm focusing on working with university students to identify what kind of research they do in the blockchain space in the different industries. And obviously we want to bring this to the CVA enterprise members. And the last point is we obviously are setting up events like this to bring together the interested parties in the enterprise working group and share with them obviously the knowledge from the universities. We'll also share the book, and then we're also going to have some industry specific events this year. Now, I would like to introduce you to Timo Schneider. He has done his master in logistics and infrastructure mobility at the University of Hamburg. He also wrote his thesis there, so we will hear about that. I think in the meantime, Timo has moved to the industry to ChainStep. The reason because he wants to be more hands-on and implement and these solutions. And now Timo will share with us his research, which he specifically did on standards. So we would like to welcome you, Timo, and the stage is yours.
Right. Yeah. Thank you for the opportunity. As Mauro introduced me, we met in a previous meeting, and it was a little bit about standards, but I was asked to hold my own meeting or own webinar. So this pretty much is the reason why today we're talking about why or how standards can become critical blockchain implementation factors. And as Mauro already mentioned, I'm not at the university anymore. I'm working for ChainStep. It's a Hamburg-based company. We are pretty much in the fields of product development and consulting company. So we advise the management consulting all the way through to the product engineering, from identifying customer needs to potential to business potential. So all our products basically have something to do either with blockchain or self-sovereign identity, which I will later refer to as well. And also we are industry independent, so from logistics and supply chain over to mobility, insurance, and even regulated industries like aerospace or pharmaceuticals. So a wide range where you can play around. So first of all, we'll talk about who I am. Timo, I'm working as a junior consultant, and obviously I started at the University of Hamburg of Technology. Now I'm working at ChainStep, and also we now present our first, or we already developed our own product now called CircLog, which I'll later refer to as well. But today's presentation will be mainly about standards. So an overview, what I'll be talking about today. First, to find a definition, what standards are, why they can be success factors. And I wanted to grasp like 3 examples from my thesis to a product or project where I started working at ChainStep, and now like the product we developed, and come to a conclusion and then there hopefully will be time to ask questions. I hope you will have questions and be curious about the topic. So first of all, before you talk about anything, you need to find a definition. And the same that I do for my master thesis. So obviously standards are not just something you have an idea about and you write them down and that's it. But there are like institutional bodies, standardized bodies. So for example, you might heard about the IEEE or the ISO, and they define standards as published documents to ensure reliability of things people use every day, or the ISO rather defines them as a formula that describes the best way of doing something. And I formulated my own definition out of different definitions and came up with the really simple definition that you can keep in mind is standards improve collaboration for developing new things. New things can be services, products, or something else, but basically improve collaboration and basically set standards. So now the more interesting part about is why they can or how they can become success factors. And well, the easiest thing would be to say, well, they make things easy, but that's not the only thing, because you can derive factors from development, interaction, or to make your product or services future-proof. But what do I mean by that? Well, if you think about standards in development, they create certainty for development. Why is that? If we think about, like, for example, let's take a piece of paper and you develop something in the realm of a piece of paper. Well, you could start with something like a square or a triangle, but most people won't use that. They would use, I don't know if you heard of DIN A4, but it's also a standard, and it makes development for that product easy because, well, it gives certainty to your development. Well, this is a rather simple idea, but it transfers to more complex things like software development or product design. Well, and by giving certainty to development, it also creates, well, interoperability, because people can actually use things that work together because they are based on, well, the same standards, and people use the same language or the same idea behind it. And the best thing for companies is obviously they close the gap between research and the product itself, because not every company has to come up with their own solution on how to tackle something. So this is probably out of the three the most economic reason behind it, that there's less work to do and, well, more certainty. On the interaction aspect, it's not such a hard definition, but obviously customers who are who use your product or are used to using your product, they accept it more if they know what it does or where it comes from or how it works. Well, you obviously don't know how every product works under its hood, but it gives you some sense of certainty that you know, well, that there's a general idea behind it. And also, if you think about relations between suppliers and clients, if they speak the same language, they can interact better. This doesn't necessarily has to mean they all have to interact in standards, but in a standardized way makes relations much more suitable for each other, for each party. And the third aspect, and probably something that's the most important in the realm of blockchain technologies, I would say, is it makes applications future-proof, but this definitely depends on how applications are used. So if there will be a general blockchain standard in the future, it gives everyone who's working in that realm the necessity to update or to adapt. So if you think about past developments, there are a lot of fragmented ideas, and a lot of hard work has to be done to bring them together to, well, pull in the right direction. And standards help to, well, adjust the direction in which you want to move. And by that, obviously, in the end, they increase the competitiveness, because once everyone is on board, you can't hide behind the fact, oh, well, we use something different. Now we don't compete with the other application because it's something totally different. No, because once you find the same language, you compete with everybody else, which will increase the competitiveness. And as we all know, increase the quality of products or services as well. But well, that's enough of like the dry information or the dry theory behind it. Now I want to present you 3 examples. And the first one, no, it's not a blank slide. Well, I started with my thesis. I start in a chronological order. And as Mauro already mentioned, I wrote my master thesis about evaluating blockchain standards for localization and logistics. Well, the real title was much longer, but essentially it's the main message behind it. And to give you some impression, even though there were not that many pictures to take from, you get an idea. So on the right side, there is like the standard or the structure of the standard. You don't have to see the whole structure. So I didn't put in the whole picture because you don't need to know what the standard looked like, but what the idea behind it is. So the standard I was using, and which is actually the first standard for logistics that was published, was from the BITA. And they said, look, to use localization on blockchain standards, you could potentially use this structure. So as you can see, there are a lot of elements for a position. So what would this look like if you, well, actually use it in your application? Well, I used it obviously with the address of my university, or at least the institute where I wrote my master thesis, that you actually create a JSON data from it. And as you can see, there are different kinds of how you can actually, well, put your address in a JSON format. Well, this is rather dry, but it's necessary for standards to be like very precise and say, well, you can do this and you can't do this, or at least say you shouldn't do this. So on the left side is just a sliced up image of tools I used for that, but I'll talk about that on the next slide. But what's really interesting was in the end, well, what's the result, or what were the questions that I tested the standards with? Well, I asked myself in the end 4 major questions because it's still an academic paper, so I have to extend the knowledge and come up with results. So for the BITA standard, I asked, is it technology agnostic? And what do I mean by that? Well, most of you know that there are a lot of blockchain technologies out there. I guess the most well-known probably are the Hyperledger framework, probably Fabric, Hyperledger Fabric, or let's say public blockchains like Ethereum. And what was really striking to me was that it's actually not a general standard, but more one suited to Hyperledger Fabric. And the funny thing is that I used Ethereum to prove or to build this prototype. What the prototype was, I'll show in the next picture. So it's not really technology agnostic, but standards for blockchains should be that, or should name themselves private or public blockchain standard or something else. Well, in the end, second question, is it technically feasible? Yes, it was, because workarounds are possible. You just have to do assumptions for it. Well, this is not what a standard is asking for. A standard is not, well, make assumptions and then use this standard, but it's rather use the standard so you don't have to make assumptions. In the third question I asked was, well, is it incorporating existing standards? For example, if you're already working with, well, let's take the DIN A4 paperback. Well, are you using already existed and accepted standards? Yes, the standard is using already existing standards and incorporates them. So, for example, in Germany, we have the zip code. So the first localization you see there is basically a German standard for how to localize your address. And obviously that's pretty much easily feasible with that. And in the end, I asked a rather provocative question and asked, well, was the standard developed sustainable? So is it able to evolve, and was it done with experts, or was it rather the first draft? And I think it's something between both, because if you see how many people work for the standard, a lot of people gave their input, but as you can see, standardized setting or standard setting institutes like IEEE or the ISO are still working on their standards. So I think it's a first draft, but a rather immature standard. But what did I actually do? Just a quick roundup. I actually used an RFID scanner, sent a signal to a small PC, Raspberry Pi, and then sent everything to a smart contract and, well, store the location, and in the end, make it able to show it in a web front end. So basically on a website. Normally you would say, well, on the first hand, there are no standards involved, but for example, RFID is using extensively ISO standards for identification. Well, the method I transferred it was an ISO standard network protocol. So I didn't come up with my own RFID scanner or my own network protocol. Well, the Raspberry Pi is a very standardized small PC. Think of it as a laptop without a screen. And obviously also blockchains like Ethereum formulating their own standards, most commonly known the ERC20 and ERC721 standards that you use on Ethereum to publish your own tokens. And obviously you're not redefining web development, you use standardized tools that help you to achieve goals quickly. So as a second example, which I won't go into too much detail, I just want to bring up the idea. Instead, on my first project for ChainStep, I worked with secure digital identities. So the whole idea, or what it was a state-funded research project for identities. And what it's basically is, it's leveraging decentralized IDs, or DID, together with verifiable credentials. Well, you don't have to know what's behind those cryptic abbreviations, but the W3C, a standardized setting body that defined the standards for, well, internet communication, is currently working on standards for decentralized IDs. And the SSI, so self-sovereign identity behind it, and the DIDs are basically using blockchain to, bring back anonymous, or the anonymity back to the users of the internet. And it was fascinating to see that, well, this is just one use case of blockchain or distributed ledger technologies, but it's a whole nother approach than what blockchain previously did in different industries like logistics, where you try to, well, save your data in a secure way or, well, encourage trust. It's now used to enable secure identities. And as a conclusion, I draw from that standards actually allow great shifts. And I think that in the next couple of years, we will hear a lot more about that as well. And as a third example, I wanted to bring up current product I'm working on. And well, what did we do? We had a customer, generally speaking, laboratories or people who, well, actually publish certificates. Industry, cotton, well, you wear a t-shirt, but you never really hear about the industry or what their problems are. And well, the problem, yeah, I already said it, was the certificate handling. So just to give you a quick idea of what their problem is that laboratories normally publish, well, they analyze raw material and give you a certificate and say, well, that's the quality of your goods. But that's the thing they can do really well. But when it comes to the certificates, some of them still send them out as a PDF via email. Well, that's obviously a digital process, but it's not really mature or isn't really leveraging what is possible and is far from being automatable. So today's solutions, just to give you an idea why we came up with that idea, is that you could either use PDF signatures, simple to use, but well, still limited functionality because you're not doing anything with the data, which obviously is one of the great benefits from blockchains. You could also use, well, ERP systems. You have all the extended workflows, but for normal laboratories, you don't want to implement a whole ERP system just to get more functionality because, well, that's complex and expensive. So we thought that we use a simple model kit and offer inexpensive functionality. But why am I talking about this right now? Well, obviously, we are in the realm of blockchain and we use blockchain as a part of it. And what it is in the end, it's a simple platform, and we didn't revolutionize the wheel with it. We just used what is there, and I think that's the beauty of it, and that's still applicable to standards, because what you see is just some screenshots and how the interface is looking. But what's important is what's behind the surface. Well, first of all, what we're doing with it is, well, we enable the automation of processes. Well, you don't have to send out PDFs via mail. You can just handle the actual content you're producing. Well, the data is safe. You're pretty much future-proof, at least to this point, and you have a lean implementation. But what I wanted to show with that is, well, we didn't revolutionize the wheel by just using standardized approaches. And obviously, we use Kafka for interfaces, and as I already mentioned, the JSON data format, just something really simple and basic for the data types. And obviously, we use some knowledge for blockchain, but didn't come up with something brand new. And in the end, I wanted to draw the conclusion to come to an end and give the opportunity to ask, if you have some questions about it, why were standards necessary for that? And well, they enabled us to fast track the development. As I said, we collected knowledge by being on the one hand, a consultancy or a consulting company. But on the other hand, we are also creating products for customers. And with working with standards, it enables us to fast track our development. As you just saw, we use standardized approaches and didn't come up with a complex or a new idea of solving an existing problem. Well, it secures the compatibility by using something like Kafka interface together with the blockchain. You don't have to worry about, is my application able to communicate with the legacy system of another company? You can just plug and play it because, well, it's an interface you can work with. And it provides riskless innovation because you can adapt to new ideas with known technology and with known knowledge, and well, create something new by using things you know best. And yeah, well, that's the end of what I wanted to present today. I hope it wasn't too dry, but gave you an insight in why and how standards can be a success factor for companies, either implementing or even just thinking about using something distributed ledger technology like or not. And obviously don't hesitate to contact us if you have further questions, but I'm also happy to answer your questions or discuss with it now. So yeah, thank you for your attention, and let's see.
Thanks a lot. It was very interesting. You know, I think you touched on different aspects, you know, more technical aspects, standard aspects, but also kind of interoperability and other things, which I really liked. So a few questions, or maybe just also for the people, you know, on the call here. Just quickly tell us, you know, what beta means, and also why did you choose that topic to research? You know, you had probably lots of different options in different industries, but you know, what drove you to kind of deep dive into this part?
Yeah, well, the BITA or Beta was is an organization mainly based in the United States, where a whole bunch of logistic companies came together and thought like, okay, to leverage something or to get an idea behind a new technology, they decided to put in their ideas and come up with a standard. And a pretty simple idea behind it is that they were simply the first that actually wanted to publish a standard and made it possible for other people to test it out. So the main idea behind it is that yeah, you get a first idea of how a standard could look like and what are the problems and the benefits of using one. And therefore, we choose that as a first draft and made some insights.
Cool. Have you seen a similar organization develop in Europe or other parts, which would potentially, you know, use this standard or would go with some of the others, which we also expect to come? I think, you know, if I'm not mistaken, IEEE or ISO are both, or at least one of them, working on standards.
Well, the problem is that, yeah, obviously companies are working with the ISO, otherwise as standard setting institutes couldn't come up with standards anyway if they wouldn't leverage, well, the idea and knowledge of the economy side. But what I see when I look into like both directions, United States and China, you can see that there are their own momentum, let's say it like this, that, for example, platforms like TradeLens or GSPN, TradeLens for like the Europe, USA side, and GSPN for the Asia, China side, they are working on their own like frameworks, generating a lot of movement and setting their own rules. So for a lot of standards, standards are not competition free, obviously, which is good, because else you would just set a standard and say, well, that's it, live with it, and it wouldn't evolve. So when I look into other continents, especially in the realm of logistics, there are own key players who take the lead in setting standards. And even though they are not official standards, they help to define what's the best approach. In the end, standards are just helping you to find the best way, as I said earlier, to, well, interact with each other, collaborate. And that's the same at an economic scale as well, that people just have to use the same language to interact with each other. So
actually, Timo, it would be great. You mentioned a couple of, names before. If we could get them, so we could kind of like provide them as well to the group here. That would be fantastic. You mentioned the I think Asian organization, right, as well. I think that would be great. The other thing is also, I assume this global business, right? So I think, will they connect together? Is this do you see that happening, that it is going to be a global business and these standards are going to evolve globally?
So I really hope that the standards will be published soon, so the development can take place using those standards. Because what we see today is that a lot of big companies are using the ability to, well, set standards for themselves. So, for example, the ISO and the IEEE finally is 2021. So they published their first standards this year and in the upcoming year, 2022. And which wasn't the case while I was writing my thesis. It was a longer period to wait for them. But the more time will go, the less impact standards will have, because people say, okay, well, we do our own standards. But once they will be published, I think there will be a second, well, movement to actually come up with new solutions once you actually have something you can hold to, and, well, which especially for smaller applications, it's necessary to, well, have something to go along with and not do all the research on their own. So I think that they will actually help and thrive the development, definitely.
If we want to tell those companies in Switzerland or Europe how to connect to these bodies, consortiums, or whatever, who are active, would you know a few which they could contact and get involved?
Well, obviously, to get involved with, the first address would always be the standard setting bodies. So always the first idea that every country has its own standard setting body, or at least they're working in bigger groups together. And we were also approached by the German university, the RWTH Aachen, who have their own project called AB Chain, to create a framework which also goes into the direction of creating standard. So, not to dodge your question, but to rather give a general answer, that I couldn't just name all the people or all the institution you could go to, but rather approach either established institutions or go for local standard setting bodies if you actually want to interact with them and to leverage it. On the other hand, there would be like bigger institutions, like, as I already mentioned, like trade unions, who can actually leverage a lot faster, obviously, because economy always works faster than the government or institutions like that. So, but on this side, it's more like very industry related, because they're not setting standards for the whole world, but rather for their business, and therefore it's very fragmented, I would say.
Timo, in your research, did you find specific topics that standardization organizations were focusing now on in particular, or and if yes, what would they be? And the second thing is, would you agree that they're focusing on the right things, or did you find that that the industries should now, or these bodies should now focus on other standardization more urgently?
Well, it's a good question. For example, the IEEE is roughly working about 20 to 25 standards, and they are very spread out. For example, dominant buzzwords would be IoT, so how to interact with the Internet of Things, but also in the realm of agriculture, already very regulated industries like medicine and pharma. At least from the IEEE, there will be a bunch of standards coming up, and I think they will be in the right direction. Also, there will be something for logistics, or rather supply chains, be prepared, but unfortunately I couldn't peek into it because I'm not part of their organization. And on the other hand, for the ISO, they have a much more general approach. I think they want a much more general standard for what is actually a blockchain, what is distributed ledger technology as a whole, and how are smart contracts working. And they're not this like industry specific, but rather focus on a whole spectrum. So I would say it's always good to look on both sides, but if you think about what will actually be applied by by companies worldwide, I would rather say the more specific and the more directly focused the standard is, the better you can adapt it to your specific industry you're in. Because once you know, or if you know that the distributed ledger works like this, won't help you to actually solve your problems or have a detailed idea about how you could tackle the problem. So I think the problem, the standards will be solved in both ways, general and very specific.
Mm-hmm. I think one thing we observe in a lot of enterprise blockchain solutions or proof of concepts, independent on what stage they are, is that there's usually, I mean, the successful solutions have a consortium of various companies that are working on a value chain that is on the blockchain or on the distributed ledger network. But one thing is that we see that these consortium work always on different blockchain technologies. And sometimes similar solutions actually work on different blockchain technologies. And the biggest question is, okay, how do we manage interoperability in the future between those different blockchains? Have you discovered in your work already some initiatives in that direction?
Well, I think the main problem is that a lot of those projects, I would say, started quite early, before blockchain became probably a little more mature. So companies actually, if they want to use a blockchain, they have to actually decide pretty early on what they want to use, or at least how I found it was that they pretty early on decided, okay, we want to use this kind, probably already deciding private or public blockchain, and then trying to solve it this way around. To solve it, that's a good question. on the one hand, what it's especially in our product development, the focus is to actually first understand the problem, then come up with a strategy to solve it, and then see what's the best or what are the best tools for it. I think that would probably lead to same approaches for the same problems, but also on an interoperability on blockchains. I think it's a little early to say that this will be solved in the future, but also like initiatives like Polkadot are already working on being actually something or be a blockchain for all blockchain or connecting them. So I wouldn't say that in the future it would be a big problem if you're working or the company is working on different blockchain solutions, because a lot of them potentially offer more benefits than other and potentially are more beneficial to use than to agree on one or two frameworks or blockchain applications that everyone can use, but rather develop a layer that can be laid upon your specific application that helps to generate interoperability.
I assume, Timo, potentially, I don't know how you think about that, where most of the companies will go will be probably the network which is going to be most active, right? Or, you know, to kind of allow interoperability, or not in on a blockchain space, but within the network. I don't know how you see that. If there's a clear, you know, direction, Ethereum, Hyperledger, who's going to be the master or the best suited chain for this kind of, you know, processing.
Even go further. Is it more distributed ledger technology or blockchain technology? I mean, is it more R3 kind of stuff, or is it really Ethereum kind of stuff?
Right.
That's a really big question. I don't really know if I could answer it right now, but obviously companies are choosing it for a reason. If a company goes for a private blockchain, mainly Hyperledger, which is has all their own projects for their own purposes, they do it for a reason, and I don't think that the reason will change in the future. And it's most commonly that they use it for privacy reasons, or for like, well, not expose your data. They are always like, well, zero knowledge proof ideas that could actually solve the problem, or they could actually also like solve it with oracles to prove that the data that is inserted is correct and give an intrinsic motivation to work in the same direction, to not, well, do something wrong with the data or to submit wrong data. There could be set incentives, but I think that there, at least if there's not if there will never be developed the upper layer blockchain that works above all them, there will always be like a hard cut between blockchain solutions. So but I don't necessarily think or agree that hard cut is necessarily something that is too bad, because as I said, there are a bunch of different technologies and they all more or less have a purpose, and interoperability can always be achieved by a second or third layer. So let's see what the future brings, if they will all join on one concept, or if it still be fragmented but covered up with a layer.
Yes, I have one or two other questions I want to mention to the group here. If you have any questions, please enter them in the Q&A. We will pick them up and we can ask Timo. In the meantime, Timo, just two other thoughts here, or two other points. One is, as you said, you know, these companies will choose the chain for a reason, the network for a reason. And I think probably it has to do as well with the integration in their current infrastructure. I've come across, some projects I did in the financial industry where, the integration is more expensive than, the whole installation of a service, just blockchain based. So I wonder, especially in the logistics, and this is why I think Hyperledger has probably, in this space, is probably the favorite chain, is because they probably have from their past, or they are integrating their, systems they use in the different, let's say, industrial silos, right? I don't mean the negative, which they can integrate with Hyperledger, and that probably could be one reason they stay. And the other question I wanted to ask, if you know anybody who has a live project, that's the usual question.
So for the first answer, it would be, well, if using blockchain isn't solving your problem or is more expensive than not integrating it, then I would question if blockchain is the right solution for it, because it shouldn't make your life harder just because you use something because you think it's the right solution. I think that's something that a lot of POCs have shown that, well, it's maybe it's not mature, maybe it has to develop in a stage where it's also suitable in a fragmented way, but it's a really young technology. And well, circling back to standards, as long as you don't have something to hold on, you have to do all the research and all the development to actually get your application live and actually work with it. And once you get it on a live stage, it's a long way, because you can't actually, or until up to this day, not to my knowledge, like really plug and play a solution, maybe with like an embedded solution or something like a private blockchain, like Hyperledger. But yeah, to not extend the answer too much, I would say always ask if implementing a blockchain is the right solution if it costs more than to not do it. And on the other hand, well, a lot of it depends on what definition of blockchain you're talking about. Obviously, with private blockchains, there are more or less a few projects I know of, even though they're not like consistently used as, let's say, a simple database, they're still currently used. And for example, also in China, the Chinese government is really having a high pace with implementing a lot of different blockchain solutions. I haven't read into what they use or how they use it, but I would definitely point in that direction, because it streamlines the focus. And I think that's one of the key reasons why it's not that well spread around the world, because it's really like unsure in what direction it would be the right, in what direction would be the right direction. Yeah, and obviously we're using it as well, not on a scale like you would use a database, but you definitely see that yeah, you can use it. And for example, as I mentioned before, but swiftly switch to the next topic, it can be seen as a technology for other ideas as well, just like decentralized identities, which doesn't necessarily has to be a mainly blockchain focused idea, but rather as a protocol that at a certain point uses the idea of a decentralized storage, but it's not like based around it as a whole, but rather utilizes the strength and not putting too much effort to focus on it.
Very good. Thanks a lot. I don't know if anybody else has any questions. Dennis, do you have any other questions you would like to ask?
No, I think that was a very, very good, interesting topic that you picked there at the university. What did your professor mean?
Well, what did he
What
say?
was
Or
the response from your professor about it? What did he think about it?
well, there were a lot of interesting questions about blockchain in a general, as a general, because the topic is rather new to the institute. So but it definitely was fun, and also my mentor already read a lot and also wrote his own book, so it was like, I think for him, interesting insight into how a prototype could be looking like. And I hope at least to see some more progress from my institute to push that topic further, and probably we'll see more response when they actually come back to it with hopefully defined standards that help them to make more academic research on it.
Actually, talking to Johannes, there's a few other people doing some thesis right on blockchain, so which will be come back and present here as well in the next couple of months. I think they're more in the construction industry, right, if I'm not mistaken. Timo, you probably shouldn't. So that could be interesting too, to get the view from on the different industry and deep dive how they're doing. Okay, very good. Any other questions from anybody?
No, they are quite a silent group tonight.
Okay, good.
Which is understandable. I think we are all totally Corona lockdown, with video conference overload. Yep. But
okay, very good. Yeah. Timo, anything you would like to add?
No, it was nice to be able to present, actually have a nice discussion about it.
We would like to thank you. And Timo, we would like to thank you. I think that was very lots of good insights, very interesting discussion. Thanks a lot, and hope to see you back. Also would like to thank Nikki, who has organized everything so that we can have this webinar, and everybody else. Obviously, welcome to the next webinar where we're going to deep dive on some blockchains and adoption in some industries. Thank you, everybody, and a good night.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.